We are back. My name is Pradeep Sangha, and we have my brother here.
Harjeet Sangha, how are you, everybody?
And so we have business brothers. We're the co-founders, and we have an advisory firm that's focused on helping family businesses grow, scale, transition, all the fun stuff there. And we're just continuing the conversation that we had from before, which was when you're transitioning the business from one generation to the next, when is the right time to have that conversation? Harj, we already covered that. That's pretty much immediately. But then the next part is, well, who should be at the table when you have that conversation? Because this is going to help you either structure the proper path or maybe a convoluted and a path that kind of leads down the wrong direction here. So I got my 2 cents here, Harj. I'm going to share this and then I'm going to throw it over to you. But I think the most important thing is to have people at the table that can have effective conversations. Because
That's
if you
probably a good
have
starting point.
yeah, because and again, we're talking a lot about the Indian community, but if you have someone there that you know is just going to throw things off the rails and off the track and just whether get up or start a fight or whatever that is, that's not the best way to start the conversation. So I always encourage people, whoever is going to be the person who initiates it. So if you're listening out there and you're going to be the person who initiates it, to have one-on-one conversations first with the key parties. And the key parties, from my perspective, are the people who are part of the ownership. Arj, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's the process that we follow. Is let's get the owners involved in the conversation first, individually, before we get them together as a group.
Yeah, I'm pretty. And there's going to be different layers of ownership. There's going to be different perspectives of majority versus minority. But I agree with you. The starting place is looking at your cap table and looking at everyone who's got a stake in the success of the business should be at the table. That's the best starting point from day one.
Yeah, I think, and even in this conversation, like if we use our family for as an example, dad was more of the conversation person rather than mom, but mom owned half the business. And so it's this is another part of the question. So if you have parents who both own part of the business, should both parents be involved? I personally think they should. Timing is another part, though, right? Do you bring both parents in together for the conversation, or do you bring them in separately? I've seen experiences where, yeah, the mom is just a completely different personality, where she has different thoughts, or the dad was a completely different personality and has different thoughts. In one instance, one of our clients, the mom is the one that wanted to give one of the sons the business, and the dad didn't want to give the business to any of the sons. They didn't have any daughters, so that wasn't a challenge for them or an issue. But you can see that even within the parents, they weren't aligned. So, Harj, I'm going to throw it over to you a little bit in terms of, okay, now we're having these conversations. You're having individual conversations first with the key stakeholders or the owners, then bringing potentially the rational group together, right, and then maybe including the irrational people in after that. But what's your thought? How do you get people? How would you reach this conversation with your parents, maybe knowingly, or maybe you don't know whether your parents are even on the same page?
Yeah, and you got to approach it from the lens of who can you have transparent, forthcoming communication, and who's going to take it well. To your point, I think we have to define rational when it comes to family business because sometimes people might see themselves as rational and they're not. But from the perspective of where can you get the best traction to kind of really jumpstart the conversation, and that can be either parent or both parents, depending on their level of communication and just towards their general attitude of having the conversation. Because sometimes you may think that they're not interested, but they may be thinking it all along and just saying, "Hey, great that you brought it up because this is what's been keeping us up at night."
Yeah.
And also, we don't want to forget about the spouses who are married to the
Yeah.
children of the next generation as well. And we can speak about our personal experience as well, because we have to also acknowledge and appreciate their sacrifices that they've done and continue to do so, so that their spouse, who is a child or sibling of the business, can continue to succeed and find success there. Also, in addition, they're grooming the next gen after that generation, right? So they're probably thinking too, whether it's the husband or the wife who's the spouse of the business owner or future business owner, we need to appreciate their sacrifices as well. Because if they see challenges in the family business, they're going to be having secondary thoughts of, do I want my children to be
Yeah.
involved in that toxicity or that environment? So, yes, you start off with the owners, the shareholders of the business, and then you also want to look at other stakeholders who necessarily might not be on the equity sheet as well. So, start off immediate owners, then maybe expand to other important key family members. And let's not forget about the other professionals you can bring into the conversations. Some of these conversations can be started with the family. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes you need a professional to kind of jumpstart that conversation. And there's great professionals from various backgrounds, whether they're accountants, they're M&A advisors, individuals like ourselves who come from traditional finance careers, and so forth. But there is help. So let's not forget about those individuals too that you can kind of bring in.
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of things. So first of all, and we're very transparent here, and I think that's one of the most important things because we've gone through these experiences ourselves, and I think it's important to be transparent. So, Harj, you talked about, I can't remember exactly what you said, but transparency is very important in this process, and I think a lot of people, I'm going to say, understate that and undervalue that because I've seen a lot of people try to work behind the scenes. It's almost like the show Succession, right? Everybody's trying to play each other behind the scenes, and it always tends to backfire. It always, in every single case, it backfires in some way, shape, or form. Now, one person or two people might get the outcome that they're looking for, but someone is uh, ends up in a bad situation in that case. So transparency is important. Having those tough conversations is important. This is where I have to give mom a ton of respect because when our dad passed away, my mom, and you're talking about spouses, Harj, she brought our spouses to the table when we were speaking about this whole succession and transition and estate planning with a lawyer. And and I thought that was pretty classy of mom to do that. And she very openly said, like, I want to make sure that my daughter-in-laws are taken care of. I want to make sure that everybody is having open conversations. We have nothing to hide. And I thought that was very interesting because that creates an environment of transparency, of trust and loyalty. And that is one of the key aspects of transitioning. I want to share the an opposite example that I think is actually pretty. I'm going to say it's somewhat comical, and I don't want to make light of anybody's tough situation. And first and foremost, we are very confidential. So all of our clients, we remain complete 110% confidentiality and privacy. So we don't share any names or any specific instances where someone could say, "Hey, that's that so and so," and we know within our community, Harj, that that happens quite often, right? As soon as you give one hint,
Fortunately,
it
true,
goes out, it goes above. But in this one particular, I'm fairly confident that no one's going to know about this instance where the son and the mom were having a conversation in the driveway about how to split the business assets up without the dad being present because they knew the dad wasn't going to be on board. They knew that the dad had his own plan. And guess what ended up happening? The dad actually heard them from the security cameras. So he was a little bit paranoid and he was watching, excuse me, and he heard the conversations. And immediately what he did was he kicked that son out of the business. And so this is a prime example of what you don't do, right? Trying to work behind the scenes and trying to, manipulate or maneuver people in an unethical way because it eventually comes back and bites someone in the butt.
yeah. I mean, and there's not saying that case happens a lot in that particular instance, but probably in other different shapes or forms. There's conversations where not everybody's privy to the information, not everybody's involved in the conversation. And that can create a toxic environment in itself, right? And it
Yeah.
kind of really reduces the probability of success for the next generation. And I would say while you're currently to operate that business, it's probably not going to be a happy environment to be in. So I mean, there's different angles you can take at where maybe some individuals aren't comfortable of having the conversation, but what you don't want to do is bring people to the conversation to the table when you're forced to have the conversation. Right. In a previous episode, we kind of talked about the D's, death, disability, divorce. If you wait to those specific moments when they occur, chances are you're probably already too late to having proper governance in place. So
Yeah.
understanding who to bring to the table for the conversation is really understanding who can be in the family business. Do you limit it to just individuals who are shareholders, or do you expand it to the spouses and children who may not be on title, but are equally have equal potential of being there in the future or present?
Yeah. And the interesting part here is that, especially in the Indian community, we tend to try to keep our businesses very simple. But just because let's just say the legal shareholders, there's only two people, that doesn't mean that the conversations are going to be that simple. Because simplicity of the business structure doesn't necessarily mean that the conversations are going to be that much easier. So that's something to pay attention to. Even if you have two shareholders, whatever that looks like, that's still going to be an interesting conversation depending on the individuals. And and Harj, there's one other thing here, which is we talked about spouses that are not they might not be part of the business, they might not work in the business, might not have anything to do with the business. But quickly as well, one thing I want to point out is what about the siblings who are not in the business? Because this is very common as well, where there's let's just say it's a son. In the vast majority of cases in the Indian community, it's a son or sons that take the business, and they might have a daughter or daughters that aren't in the business. But are they brought into the conversation? And I'm going to say the recommendation is that yes, at some point they need to be brought into the conversation, especially within BC. Harj, you talked about. I'm here in Ontario, and which are have different laws, but the Wills Variation Act that can pose a problem after if a sibling who is not part of the original conversations is not um, in agreement with the outcome, they may come back and it causes bigger issues at the end of the day.
Yeah, and pretty expanding on that further too, there may be a sibling who's been quiet during the whole tenure, but who actually wants to enter the family business. Maybe they want to take a step back from their corporate career and come back to the ecosystem that they helped grow from a child. So there's always an opportunity to engage or re-engage. And don't make an assumption that because they are silent, that they don't want part of the family business or maybe some piece of the family business in terms of its continuity, whether that's from a monetary perspective or not. But I found in my experience that there are times when children do want to come back. Maybe they've gone away, they've gone to New York, they've had a great track record in law or accounting or finance, and they're saying, you know what, it's time to work for myself and the family, and I really believe I can leverage those skills. So to your comment, I believe it's great to have everybody involved, all siblings, regardless of ownership structure, because it's better to understand what that looks like, because it's harder to reverse when you have planning done and something happens upon death and you're looking at the estate. And
Yeah,
certainly that's a time of grieving. That's when people don't take well to surprises. So
yeah,
I'm a big believer that having clear communication, I'm sure you're on board with that as well, but you don't want to surprise certain family members. That's when you can really cement in some just resentment,
yeah.
and it can
Good point.
impact the family.
Good point. So just to wrap this up here, um, in terms of who should be at the table, definitely it starts with the ownership. We recommend talking to the individual owners first to get a pulse and get a read on where they sit and their ability to have this conversation. Then bring the entire ownership group together, the rational ones, and then potentially the ones who are not as rational, as well as spouses that are in the family unit, and then also siblings that may not be part of the business but are in the family unit. So bringing everybody together is an important thing eventually, but doing it systematically and strategically is that much more important. So, Harj, I think in the next episode, I got a good one for us to cover, which is who are the professionals that should be involved in this conversation as well. So we'll cover that in the next episode.
All right. Until then, folks, have a great day.
Take care.